Hey everyone, so today I'm going to be talking about my philosophical concept of radical aesthetics. It's essentially the idea that there is a singularity between the material and the metaphysical. If we think of time and the relativity of time and the fact that we are just experiencing time linearly, then there's a whole dimension that exists beyond how we experience the world. Of course, we experience it as a sort of straight line of beginning and end. And I want to begin this video with looking at it from a linear perspective, what radical aesthetics means, what it means for the material to transcend to the metaphysical, for what it means to be one of the same thing, that there is no duality between what is material and what is metaphysical, and that they're actually the same thing, and that there is a sort of process, and that these things are just stages in that process. So I want to take it back to the idea of art, and how art is the bridge between the material and the metaphysical. And I'm going to give you this analogy. So I want you to imagine the artist as an architect of metaphysics, someone essentially who creates metaphysics. And here's how the artist does that. If you have a painter, for example, right, you have all these colors at the painter's disposal, and you have a canvas. On their own, each color is just a color. The canvas is just a canvas. The brush is just the brush. And perhaps the artist is just the artist. These are all just material objects which have no significance on their own. Now, the artist, as an architect of metaphysics, is able to manipulate nature, to bend nature to his will, and take all these colors together, which mean nothing on their own, and turn them into this beautiful painting that has a sort of spiritual essence about it. Think of Michelangelo's painting in the Sistine Chapel. You think of the feelings that are evoked when looking at it. That is a spiritual feeling. That is being one with the metaphysical, experiencing metaphysics firsthand. And in the beginning, all these things meant nothing on their own. And through the artist, the architect of metaphysics, the person who bent nature to his will, he was able to create something that was greater than the sum of its parts. Even though all these colors on their own, even if you just put them in a pile, meant nothing, the way he was able to blend them together, to blend these images together, this perfect painting, that is the creation of metaphysics. That is radical aesthetics. That's starting off with the material and, like I said, through our linear perception of time, turning it into something metaphysical. On their own, they were just colors. It was just, a chapel without anything on it. And of course, just the chapel having a religiosity about it also is sort of adding metaphysics to it. But if we just think about the material blank slate on that chapel ceiling, it was nothing before. And after Michelangelo bent all these beautiful material substances together, he created a spiritual element, a spiritual quality for the Sistine Chapel, for this material object. He turned all these colors in the painting into something beautiful, the painting itself. So that is the analogy I want to use of art being a bridge between the material and the metaphysical. I also want to talk about Julius Evola's chapter on the Roman conception of victory in Metaphysics of War. Of course, I've done a video on this before where I think I introduced the idea of radical aesthetics for the first time. And I want to talk about how the Romans viewed the deification of the eternal conqueror, as well as their view on human fate and destiny. See, Evola points out that for the Greeks, they sort of have this somewhat predeterminist approach to fate, that fate is something that happens and you must ride the wave of fate, you must ride the wave of destiny, that you must live your life boldly and powerfully and beautifully until your destiny is revealed to you. However, the Romans believed in altering your fate directly through human action, that human action is what created destiny, that they could bend fate to their will. And I think this is exactly the idea of radical aesthetics. See, the future is unknown, and if you truly believe that whatever you do has no say over the future, then how are you ever going to change it? But believing that humans can change their fate, that humans have a direct role in the happenings of the gods, that they have a direct link to metaphysics that gives them the autonomy, that makes them the architect of metaphysics, people who can go out there and seize their destiny. The Romans believed their conception of victory was that to sort of worship the gods properly, to worship their faith, their Hellenic pagan faith properly, they must go out and they must win wars. They must have great conquests for the glory of Rome, for the glory of their gods. There was this martial quality about their religion, like they worshipped through conquest, through forging themselves in fire and steel to be these great warriors, these legionaries who together would literally conquer most of Europe, or at least most of the Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum, parts of Britain, Germany, whatever. Like, they accomplished so much, and it was because their belief that they had a say in their destiny. They had a say in human destiny, which meant that they had a say in metaphysics, that they could bend metaphysics to their will, that they could create metaphysics by bending nature to their will, by bending the material to their will. See, it's almost like, and I'm going to go into this a little bit more, it's the idea of the sword being an extension of the soul. You think about the samurai and the relationship the samurai have to their sword. The sword is just a sword. It's just made up of metal, and pretty poor quality metal, actually, in the case of Japan. That's why they had to become such master swordsmiths, because the steel quality was so low. So they had to temper it, multi-layer it to make it strong, to make it be able to withstand blocks and cuts and whatever. But this material thing, which is the samurai sword, the katana, begins to have a metaphysical quality because of the samurai's belief that there is something spiritual in this blade, that it is passed down from generation to generation, that a piece of their ancestors exists within their blade, that the family's honor exists within their blade. The same can be said of the Roman eagle. The Roman eagle is just a piece of metal, materially, but you would have legionaries literally sacrificing their lives to defend the eagle, people going on multiple journeys to retrieve a lost eagle. All 3 eagles that were lost in the Battle of Teutoburg Forest were eventually found again. This is how strongly they believed in the metaphysical quality of something that was just material. This is radical aesthetics again. Radical aesthetics is the material, which is the sword, becoming a part of the samurai's soul. It's the Roman eagle becoming a symbol of the legion's honor, that they would sacrifice their lives for it. How is that not metaphysical? You could say, oh, it's just an eagle. But if people are willing to do all that for it, to create this metaphysical quality behind this material object, then I would absolutely say that that is something spiritual. And going back to Rome again, there is the deification of the eternal conqueror, the eternal victor. So when a Roman triumph was called, and this was a very political act, to have a triumph called for you was a big deal. Like, that was almost as good as getting an appointment to a high position in government. So when you had a Roman triumph, you painted your face red to sort of reflect Jupiter. The color that you reflect with the cult of Jupiter is red. The victorious conqueror, the victorious Roman general, paints his face red. So it's sort of, for that short period of time, putting him on the same level as Jupiter, as Zeus, the king of all the gods. It's sort of deifying the general because of his exploits, because of his material accomplishments, which was victory in battle, which was defeating the enemies of Rome, which was expanding the borders of the Roman Empire or the Roman Republic early on. These were all examples of radical aesthetics, of people turning the material into something spiritual, into something more, into something metaphysical. Their actions in life literally led to their deification, and it's quite an interesting thing. And the same can be said even beyond the triumph. Is there is an eternal cult of the cult of the eternal victor in Rome, and it is essentially rising up these men to the position of godhood and literally considering them gods. This is true both of Roman generals and, of course, many of the legendary figures of Rome. I believe Aeneas, Romulus, and many Roman emperors were literally, after they died, within the doctrine of Hellenic paganism, even though there's no real unified body, they were officially recognized as becoming gods after their death. How is that not radical aesthetics? The man becoming God, the man through his material exploits, his material conquests, transcending to that realm of the gods. That's such a beautiful and sort of significant thing. And I want to go back to Evola, where he talks about transcendence in Ride the Tiger. And I think the way that I like to interpret transcendence is radical aesthetics. It's something going from the material to the metaphysical. And what I like about Evola, despite the fact that I think he clings too much to the past and he's too much of a traditionalist, whereas I would say that I build off of the past. I build off tradition, the way Nietzsche says in Human All Too Human, that metaphysics is sort of the doctrine that we should build off of. So I'm a futurist, right? But nonetheless, Evola has many great ideas, and one of them is taking charge of your spiritual destiny, taking charge of metaphysics. He criticizes both the complete materialist and the complete ascetic, and he sort of points to Christianity for the ascetic, and of course the sort of modern, whether it's Marxist or capitalist man, who believe that their ends is determined through the material. So for the Christian, he believes that he puts too much of his spiritual journey in the hands of God, that he does not carve his own destiny, that, whatever God wants, I will do. I have this religious doctrine that I'm going to follow to a T. As long as I'm a humble, good Christian, everything will be fine. And Evola doesn't like this because he feels that the Christian does not have enough of a relationship with his control over metaphysics. And this is similar to Nietzsche's critique of Christianity. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he talks about Christians, or he alludes to Christianity, as being preachers of death, because you only live in this life so that you can have reward in the afterlife. This is the fake, illusory world. The real life, the real world is after death. And this is something Nietzsche is critical about Christianity, because if he feels as if they're not having enough of a relationship with life, and therefore there's no stakes involved in their lives, so why would they aspire to greatness? Why would they aspire to conquer new lands, to discover new things, right? And this is not necessarily a fully true thing. There's many great Christian inventors, many great Christian warriors and conquerors. However, Nietzsche feels that those people were building off of their instinct of will to power rather than the actual religion itself. And this is sort of similar to what Julius Evola talks about, with materialists being too inward in the relationship with life, living purely for the material, and Christians living too outward, separate, ascetic lives away from the material entirely, where you kind of have to find almost like a Buddhist middle path. And this is something that I think both Nietzsche and Evola are feel very strongly about, and I do as well. Radical aesthetics is taking charge of the material and creating metaphysics out of it. I believe it is in Twilight of the Idols, I want to say, or maybe the Antichrist, that Nietzsche talks about pleasure, that pleasure itself is not bad, but pleasure without a spiritual quality is bad. See, the Greeks and the Romans, they had cults to Dionysus, but if you lived too materialistically, too hedonistically, you were actually doing a disservice to Dionysus. Things like pleasure should be experienced because you worship the gods through these great festivals, through beautiful exchanges of pleasure. Like you think of sex, for example. It should be this beautiful connection between two human beings, not just something somebody does for quick pleasure, right? And this is something we should all work on in our lives, is trying to see sex as a sort of spiritual experience, right? And this all ties back to radical aesthetics. So I think another way that I like to view radical aesthetics sort of ties down to, how do you really view metaphysics? People oftentimes have a very black and white view of metaphysics, which kind of goes back to Evola's critiques of the materialist, who deny it completely, and the Christian or the ascetic, who lives in it entirely. And I want to give you a sort of thought, is that think of technology and think of magic. See, magic in the old days was a wizard, creating potions out of herbs or whatever, or reading these spells which could bring lightning bolts from the sky or bring rain from the sky or whatever, right? How is that any different, truly, from technology? Technology is just us gathering all these natural resources, these real things, these material things, and creating these amazing sort of inventions out of that. Technology is radical aesthetics. On their own, the pieces of a phone mean nothing. They're like metal. They're like lithium batteries. I don't know how much of what a phone is, right? But like technology in general, whether it's phones, whether it's cars, whether it's rocket ships, the actual materials, the metal, and all these things is just metal. But the inventor, as an architect of metaphysics, takes charge of the material and creates something almost spiritual out of it, something magical out of it. Technology is literally magic. They are bending nature to their will. They're taking charge of their destiny, and they're creating this thing that is greater than the sum of its parts. The phone or this rocket ship or whatever is greater than the sum of its parts, the metal and what have you, the plastic, whatever, right? And this is literally radical aesthetics in action. So now I've sort of given you what I believe regarding the linear perception of radical aesthetics. I want to take it to something that is a little bit more complicated and might actually make everything I said mean nothing, and I'll explain why. When we think of the idea of potential, we should also see potential as a sort of pre-existence. Let's say, right, that what I'm saying is correct. if we experience time linearly, that there is a whole realm of time that exists outside of our straight perception of it, that time is a flat circle, that there is an element of time, and I think that the way we view God exists in this separation from the linear perception of time, something outside of all that. So while we're experiencing time linearly, there's something that exists outside of that. And one way to view that is, like I said, potential is pre-existence, right? If material creates the metaphysical, then the material has the potential to create the metaphysical beforehand. The material has the potential to become something metaphysical. So the colors have the potential to become great art. The metal has the potential to become a rocket ship. So how is that not a sort of pre-existence in the realm of potential? How is that not, in a way, because the idea exists, how does it not exist? So you take the first person who thought of like a flying airplane, right? When they thought of the idea existed even before the material product of that thought. So it's almost like metaphysics precedes material in that sense. But of course, the brain is sort of material, and it gives rise to the ideas. So then again, that's radical aesthetics again. Evolution, which created our minds, is radical aesthetics. That's something starting material, and now I have this idea of like a spaceship, and then I create the spaceship in reality, and that's another whole radical aesthetic cycle. And it's a really beautiful thing, I think, right? So in a sense, the material possesses a spiritual metaphysical quality beforehand because of the idea of potential, right? And I think that it's quite interesting, right? And I think this makes life more important, actually. When we think about life affirmation in the Nietzschean sense, this makes life more important. I want you to think about the idea of the rapture, the second coming of Christ, or Ragnarok. In all these religious texts, it seems that the good guys always win. God wins in the end. Satan and the Antichrist are all banished or whatever, right? But if that's true, then why does anything matter? Why does it matter that we fight? Why does it matter that we try to combat injustice if everything's going to be okay in the end? Which is why I believe in this idea of radical aesthetics. The way I see it is that there is no clear future winner, at least in our linear perception of time. Evil might win. They might win in the end. Therefore, it makes it our obligation to fight as hard as possible to make sure we, the forces of light, defeat the forces of darkness. That Ragnarok, that the raptures, these battles are not guaranteed. We ourselves have to take charge, and we have to defeat the forces of darkness. And if we don't, then, in the linear perception of time, if the bad guys, the evil men, win in the end, then from now on, that which exists outside the realm of our linear perception of time will have existed forever. So whoever wins in the end of that linear perception of time controls everything. Evil is the winner. Evil is the one that can dictate everything, that can dictate objective morality. Because, once we reach a point of singularity, of technologically exponential growth, that's the point where you've sort of uncovered all the mysteries of the universe, where you can literally bend the laws of physics. You can stop something like entropy. You can stop heat death. You can do all these great, crazy things. You can explore literally every single corner of the galaxy, of the universe. But it also means that if the bad guys win, then they have access to all this untapped power, and that they can do whatever with it. That they can literally control the entirety of time and subvert it. And, we say subvert it. If they end up winning, then you can't really subvert it, because then they become objective. But, what I'm saying is radical aesthetics, the belief that the way we experience it linearly starts off, as a material and becomes the metaphysical. That's how life is going to be. Human history is going to be that in the end. It's going to have started off Big Bang, very minute or living organism with no serious will. All it has is a will to eternity. And what I mean by that is it has a will to get from this beginning point, the Big Bang, to get to the point of technological singularity. That's it. That's its only purpose. That's the only will it begins with. So that goes along to like plants and animals and eventually humans. And humans have this great ability to get to that point of technological singularity. We're part of radical aesthetics, the sort of radical aesthetics of human history, or just history in general. So, it's this idea that we are part of this process, and whoever wins at the end of that process, in a sense, if time is relative, then the end has technically already happened. But because of our linear perception of time, we don't know that has actually happened We won't experience it like it's actually happened. So regardless if it's happened or not, let's fight our hardest. Let's fight our damnedest. Let's do our absolute most to ensure that we win in the end, to ensure that we are victorious, to ensure that the forces of light defeat the forces of darkness. It makes life all the more important, all the more meaningful, and all the more necessary for us to prepare ourselves, to make ourselves as capable of violence as possible, as wise as possible, as intelligent as possible, to band together, to organize, because life means all the more. Life is something like the Romans viewed regarding fate. Fate and human life and human history and the end and metaphysics and literally the future of objective morality is in our hands. It's in our hands. We have control over metaphysics. We can be architects of metaphysics. We have this obligation, this responsibility to actually do something, to actually act. And it's such a crazy thing. It's scary and it's beautiful and it's amazing. And again, I sound schizo talking about it, but it's something that I think is really important, and an idea and philosophical concept that I want to build on in the future and write a book about and actually explore the real science behind it, because I'm just kind of talking, based on concepts, based on how I interpret things. I have very little analytical knowledge to back this up, very little actual scientific basis for this. This is just a feeling I have that I have some information. I know about things like the relativity of time, not in a very in-depth way, but the basic concept of entropy and heat death, the fact that energy is never expended truly, it just moves, and that because of that, because energy never goes away, and that we keep slowly creating more energy, that eventually the universe will just experience heat death and everything will explode or whatever. See, I'm not that good at science, but this is an idea that I want to build on throughout my life and to make better and greater with real research. But this is the basic concept I want to get out there. You never know. I could die tomorrow. I could die in a week. I could die in a year, and no one will ever know about radical aesthetics. And maybe that's my ego talking, and it is a little bit of my ego. The ego of somebody who wants to sort of lay his mark on the world, to be etched in history. Every day I have this insecurity that my life will be insignificant. And, maybe it's all for naught. We'll nuke each other to smithereens and nobody will remember anybody. No one will even remember Alexander the Great. But I have faith. I believe in radical aesthetics. I believe that we can ensure the future so that all the great people of history will be remembered. And that hopefully people like me and you that want to move history, that want to be movers of history, will be remembered for what we do, for our exploits. And maybe if I die tomorrow, somebody will read this and they'll make a much better work inspired by this, and then they'll credit me, and then somehow I'll be remembered too. So there's my schizo rant for the day. Radical aesthetics. I'm going to write about it one day. Hope you all are doing well. And as always, this is The Warrior Philosopher, building the foundations of the warrior philosophy. We'll see you next time.